For those of you who've been to this hour before, you know I don't have any set agenda or any particular topic to discuss. This is a space for you to ask questions or talk to each other, or provide any suggestions that you have for the academic community, not necessarily only to tourism management. So if any of you have any question, you're welcome to turn on your video camera or your microphone to jump in at any time. We find a lot of people are doing AI related studies. Based on the submission to tourism management, the other day I was talking to some colleagues. Probably of the 10 submissions that I see on the screen, maybe 5 or 6 are now related to AI or generative AI. So that seems to be the hot topic. But if that's something that you're doing, make sure that you really find a particular perspective, an angle that you think you can make a contribution. Not because everybody is doing it, therefore you have to do it. It becomes a Red Sea, quote unquote, type of topic. So there needs to be a real problem that you're trying to solve, whatever that is. And of course, you need to go through that rigorous process and all the other requirements of a good piece of research. So please don't just jump into the wagon and say everybody's doing AI, Gen AI related studies, therefore you want to do it. Many of the manuscripts that we see related to Gen AI or AI actually are not based on a real problem. It's based on something the authors saw, oh, that would be interesting to find out. Interesting to find out is one thing, but are you solving a real problem? So nowadays, yes, generative AI or AI related topics are very popular, but make sure you select the topic carefully. The comment in the comment box is about Empirics First. We have seen the movement, or if you can call it a movement, mostly from the marketing discipline, where they begin to publish Empirics First type of study. In other words, if you truly cannot find an existing theory that can support the phenomenon you're investigating, and if you really have a solid, good quality data set or multiple databases, then yes, Empirics First is one approach to do it, but it's not for every study. It's not a lazy way of saying I don't have any theory. I didn't do a good job of reviewing literature. Therefore, I say there is no theory can support my study. Therefore, I just fish from the seas of data, because there's so much big data out there. Anybody can try to play with the data and try to see what it can find. That's not Empirics First. Empirics First approach is, again, you've done your literature review and there's nothing in the past in terms of theory can interpret the current phenomenon that you have discovered from the data, then Empirics First will be the approach. And I've seen marketing journals accepting papers, of course, other disciplines probably as well, accepting studies based on Empirics First approach. There is a question in the chat box saying that some of the papers published using deep learning model for tourism demand prediction and route recommendation planning, but it's difficult for the person who raised the question to reproduce those published paper because there was no source code available or even pseudo codes provided in the paper. I would recommend you contact the authors to provide a code for you. Any reasonable scholar would not mind to do it. In the past, tourism management and some other journals require the authors to submit their data set when their paper get accepted. But nowadays with big data, it's obviously not possible. So the journal will ask the authors to have the data available if ever somebody make a request or has any question about the nature of the data. But we haven't really heard anything or have any requests from authors to look at the coding. That is a good question. I can take that back to the editorial team and see what they think in terms of asking the authors to have the codes available if somebody requests it. Mixed methods research. The next question relates to mixed method research. Initially planned to develop a measurement scale to assess student participation, starting with interview. After conducting interview, surprised to find they were passionate about the participation process. If I combine this interview finding with the quantitative, I worry that the context and the rich variety of insight may be too condensed. Thinking about dividing work into two studies, one focusing on qualitative, the other focus on quantitative, incorporating questionnaire content analysis of internet blogs. Any suggestions? Dividing into two parts will be appropriate. Yes, we do see more and more mixed methods. And I have to say, nowadays, many of the journals hesitate to publish a pure scale development paper. If the entire manuscript is about developing a measurement scale, the chances of having that published in a top journal would be relatively small because scale development, the purpose of scale development is to develop a measurement, but then you have to demonstrate the use of that measurement. You develop it, but if you don't use it, then how would you expect other people will use it? So once you develop the measurement, you have to demonstrate the use of that measurement in a study. Whether, and most likely, since you have a measurement, then it will be a quantitative investigation. So by itself, then you will have a lot of information. But then the qualitative part is the first stage of the scale development, isn't it? So if you really want to have an excellent publication, I would suggest you put everything in one paper. Yes, there are a lot of information, then it's a matter of how you tell the story, how you use more effective description of what you have found. And of course, if your interview involves other questions, the interview could be, you could have 10 different questions, 12, 20 different questions. And then for the measurement part, you only use part of the interview results. Then you can obviously use the other parts of the interview results if you find those very interesting about another related topic, then obviously you can write a qualitative paper. But in the scale development process, the first stage is for you to develop measurement items. And if you use interview as part of the measurement item generation, then yes, you need to report that. But then if you can generate additional paper based on the qualitative part, that depends on how many questions you ask and what is the scope of the interview. Do you have any other questions that's not part of the measurement? So it could be a possibility, but like I mentioned earlier, if you simply write a scale development paper now following the 7 or 9 steps, and then you stop by saying, I develop a measurement and somebody can use it, probably that's not gonna be evaluated very positively by some of the journals. because the purpose of the measurement development is to use it. Then you as the author of the measurement have to demonstrate its use. For example, you want to test the relationships between that particular, obviously, it is an important variable, it's an important construct. That's why you develop the measurement. Then you have to demonstrate what's the relationship between this construct and other constructs using the measurement that you just developed. So that's just a word of caution for scale development papers. I was just at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and also by talking to colleagues on and off, very often I hear the comments that, well, but this journal used to publish papers like this. That is no longer a valid argument for a paper that may be negatively reviewed by the editor or the reviewers, because as our field mature, the quality of our output is getting higher and higher. So this particular piece in your hand could have gone through the review process and be published 5 years ago in this journal doesn't mean the same piece today will be accepted, simply because the field has progressed and the quality of the papers now submitted to journals is much higher than before. So again, try not to use the argument if you try to argue with the editor or the reviewer, but you published something like this 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, that doesn't help you with winning the argument, because the field is progressing. And that is a good sign for the tourism field. The other phenomenon that we have seen lately, in addition to AI or Gen AI studies, is the use of experimental design. I think we mentioned this a couple months ago in one of the editor office hour. So I won't repeat that. You can go back to YouTube or Bilibili to review that session if you wish. But I do want to bring up the issue again regarding data collection. Nowadays, it's so easy to go collect data online. With the requirement of having multiple sources of data, many authors simply collect 3, 4, 5 rounds of data online. Yes, you can argue that the online panel or online sample represent real consumers, but with scenario-based experiment, sometimes it's very difficult for those online participants to imagine something that you want them to imagine. We have no control of whether they had similar experience before, how relevant the experience is to them. Yes, you can do manipulation check or realism check, but those are very simplistic way of providing, if you can call that evidence, to providing support to your study. So nowadays, when we see real tourists as samples, then usually the lights go up. So yes, it is more difficult to do field experiment, to collect data in the field, to actually talk to real tourists, or to invite the tourists into, if you want to invite them into a lab or something, to do the experiment with people face to face. At least you have a bit more control over the environment, because when you do experimental study, the environmental factors need to be properly controlled. So nowadays we see a lot of experimental design study with X number of experiment, all with data collected online. Then it's more difficult for the authors to argue in terms of the reliability, validity, and all the other aspects the reviewers are looking for in a manuscript. So if you do experimental design study, please try your best to at least have some of the experiment done offline with people that you can see, with real tourists, or either in the lab environment, in a lab environment, controlled lab environment, or in the field. At least you talk to real tourists. That's what tourism is about, isn't it? Rather than doing everything online. We have a comment in the box. Building on your comments about empiric first, would it be okay to use empiric first in an area that is treated descriptively as a first exploratory approach for them to identify a theory fit between phenomena and theory based on this exploratory phase, and then the second study phase with the theoretical approach we identify? Yes, of course. We've been doing this with mixed method, didn't we? The first qualitative phase would be the exploratory, and then the results of the qualitative phase will kind of point you to a particular direction. Then you can find a theory that can help you with the second phase of the study. Yeah, so I think that's possible. But I have to say, with the manuscripts that we received, for those papers using big data as an example, to do data-driven studies, they didn't really think through the comments that you just made in terms of exploring that first and then follow up with a second study by identifying a theory fit between the phenomena and the theory based on results of the first study. Many of the data-driven studies are simply data-driven studies, and once they did a data analysis, report a finding, and then say, here it is, this is what we found, and there is a relationship, for example, between this and this, but then didn't have any theoretical support or using any theory to help even interpret the findings. Those will be purely empirical data-driven studies that usually the reviewers would have a negative feedback. But I guess it depends on the discipline. I understand some disciplines, those are perfectly acceptable.
Professor, I have another question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about the terminology, because some theories are proposed by the context in white and in Western world. So like leisure, recreation. But how can we use it if we use a big data analytics to do this kind of research? But actually the context could be different based on our understanding from Western or Eastern, right? So how can we balance this kind of bias to introduce this kind of theory and terminology into our paper?
Well, there is always that argument, isn't it? Since I think 20 years ago, Asian scholars or scholars investigation Asian tourists or Asian tourism development have always been saying the theories developed in the West may not be applicable to the phenomena in an Asian context. That is fine, but well, theory is supposed to be universal.
Yeah.
That's why they're called theories, right? But then, yes, they're supposed to be universal. However, you can make advancement, refinement, addition, adjustment to it. So I think based on the literature, if you're the first one to use the theory in a different context, you can still use the theory, but with the new context, then your findings may be used to make modification of the existing theory, or your results may challenge the theory, and you find the reason why it is different. The difference could be in a new context, in a new culture, in a new digital age that's now different from the past. So it doesn't have to be the East versus the West culture. It could be the generational culture. It could be anything, right? So that's why theories, the basics, the very primitive basics should work, but then you can fine tune it. you cannot simply say, no, that doesn't work because it was developed somewhere else. The basics should be universal, but then yes, you can find the nuances to fine tune the theory.
Oh, thank you for your response. And if I found my findings or results that could be used to challenge the theory, should I go back to this kind of theories and I have to develop my grounded theory approach to develop a new theory, like to validate my findings from the big data analytics?
Well, depending on how different it is. If it's adding one variable or is it a relationship, it used to be positive, now it's insignificant, or used to be positive, you found the other way around, it's negative. But the majority of the concept still works, then you don't have to go to zero, right? So you still have something, then you can add to it. You can make modification. You can challenge something and add a new perspective. So when they look at one way, you can say we should look at the other way. So you turn that around and challenge that. So you don't have to go back to zero.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. The next question is, do we have to use multiple experiments to validate a model before I can publish it? And how large does the data sample needs to be? There are two different questions. One is about multiple experiment. The purpose of having multiple sources of data, multiple experiment, is to validate, to provide external validity, to show that the results are not just because of the data, because of the sample. So you have to show the relationship works in sample A, it also works in sample B. So that is simply to provide external validity to the results of your study. So yes, most likely, if you can have the same experiment repeated, then that will be very helpful. The other question relates to the sample size. Then it's up to you to justify, depending on the complexity of the experiment and also the measurement items that you use. So I would suggest you to go back to the research methods or statistics books to find references to support the data, the sample size that you have. And the question about multiple experiments, again, we talk about experimental design. If you have 6 hypotheses and each experiment only tests one hypothesis, in other words, at the end of the 6th experiment, each hypothesis is tested only once, then that's not what we meant by having multiple sources of data. Having multiple sources of data, the purpose is to establish external validity. In other words, the same hypothesis needs to be tested more than once to show that even with different sample, you get similar results. All right, the new comment in the box is, I'm supervising a student. Due to logistical financial constraints, is unable to return to her home country to collect qualitative or quantitative data. We're considering use of big data as an alternative. Do you have any suggestion for overcoming these distance-related challenges? We've seen a lot of qualitative studies, for example, interviews or even focus group conducted online. Quantitative study, the same thing, right? If you want to do a survey experiment, I just mentioned that somebody used, for example, online panel to do experiment. Obviously, if you do all 5 experiment online, that's not recommended. But that refers to, for example, panel study, you use some of the online survey companies to do panel study. But if, for example, You can personally contact, people who have traveled to a destination, they have the real experience, and you interview them online or you send them a survey by yourself. That will be a different story, because the whole discussion is about, can we find the appropriate respondents? Using, for example, mTurk or some of the or even Qualtrics. I'm not questioning their quality, but if you have 5 different data sets and you collect the data all from those online panels, it's more difficult to convince the reviewers that yes, they all have the travel experience that you're looking for. So yeah, if a student cannot go back to a particular location to collect data, online could be one way to do it. The next question in the box is, how qualitative data are selectively presented? Are there any considerations or criteria? If I understand the question correctly, obviously qualitative data, then you need to go through the coding process, and very often we see direct quotation from the text. The text could be diary, could be interview, could be focus group transcripts, those are the text data, or it could be image data. For example, you ask the respondents to provide you with pictures or images of a destination, depending on what you're studying. So I guess the original data, whether it's text or image or video, they are selected carefully to represent your results, represent the concept, represent the main topic of your findings. So in other words, the original raw data are used to support the summary of your data analysis. So if your data shows that at the end there are 5 different themes derived, then obviously you need to provide quotation for each of the things, so that the readers will trust your data analysis process. Because for qualitative data, you want to establish trustworthiness of the whole process and of your results. And reporting the raw data, for example, direct quotes or image provided, that will be one way to show a link between what you're talking about, the findings of your study, and your raw data. So that's just an indication for the readers to understand your process and also trust your results. So I would suggest you to do the data analysis, coding, different levels of coding first, and then at the end to select the most representative piece of raw data to support the whether it's the category or dimension or factors that you come up with. Nowadays, with online publication, we don't worry about page numbers, the number of pages of documents that you submit. So very often we see very extensive appendices published along with article. So the article, obviously, you want to keep the story short. You want to keep your writing simple. Normally 10,000 words, 12,000 words will be the maximum, because people don't run to read a book when they read your article. So you want to keep the text, the main text, at a manageable length. But then now with online publication, you can include appendices. Appendices could include, anything. Could include the coding process, could be examples of the different levels of codes, could be examples of the raw data, demographics, obviously, and pictures and experimental design scenarios. So, or additional data analysis could be included in the appendices as well. All right. The new comments, do you have any suggestion for applying for funding? I've been trying, but haven't received any so far. Currently investing in research out of pocket. Yeah. Well, it's depending on where you are and depending, we all kind of sponsor for our professional development at one stage or another. I guess that's especially true for students, but also for early career researchers, and also depending on where you are, whether your institution provides any support. Or you can find a partner somewhere. If your university doesn't provide any support, you can find a collaborator from an institution that may have funding sources. I know going out to the industry is more challenging. It is not impossible. Very often, if you get an opportunity to do a study for an industry partner, then you can do their study, but at the same time adding additional variables or adding additional things that you think can be published. So yeah, it's kind of there isn't a one size fits all solution, but try to go different directions. Work with somebody who may have the funding, work with somebody who may have access to the funding. If you get a chance to work with the industry, for example, you can provide your pro bono research service, and they may have lots of questions. So they may help with the data collection, whether it's access or even pay for some of the cost. The cost of research is really low, especially if you go out to collect primary data on your own. The cost for you for time is high, but the actual money is quite low if you put in your own labor. So if you get a chance to do a survey, then try to think very very long and hard to put in as many possible ideas as you can think of so that you can generate output. The other question is, if I do an in-depth interview, should I, that goes back to the qualitative question, should I write every question I ask in the article, or should I just say how did I design those questions? Nowadays, reviewers are very often ask you for a list of interview questions. You can put it as an appendix. We just had a paper that was accepted a few days ago. The final requirement is please upload a copy of your interview protocol or interview questions, so that the readers can, again, this is additional piece of evidence that you are doing the research properly. You're asking the proper question that can help you answer the research questions. So as much detail about methodology as possible. The comment relates to the earlier question about funding your own research. I mentioned that professional development it's not just about doing research, not just about investing research out of your own pocket. Nowadays, we hear comments like, "Oh, I don't attend conferences because my university doesn't sponsor." That is not a good reason not to attend conferences. We all in one stage or another pay our own travel, pay for registration out of pocket to attend conferences. That's part of the professional development, just like students pay tuition. We, even though not studying for any degrees anymore, we have to pay our own development, pay for our own development. So you may say it's unfair. Yeah, some institution has more support than others, but if unfortunately your institution does not support you, you have to invest in yourself because you will benefit. Of course, you don't go to conferences to have fun and to play. You go to conferences, you identify the conferences you want to go to, you think you're going to learn something from that particular conference, then you have to make up your mind whether it's worthy of investing, in this case, your own money. But if you think it's worth it, if you think you get to see people, you think you go to that conference, you're gonna come up with new research idea, establish your own new network, know some researchers that you never get a chance to talk to, that's a professional development investment. So I would encourage you to think the other way, rather than saying I can't go because we don't have any funding. Okay.